of making. There has been a lot of last minute planning. There's been a lot of like really big ideas kind of moving themselves to next stages, and then just something else coming along that needs to take precedence. So it's been a very busy month, but overall, I think like a good month. I've gotten a lot done. Spring is on its way. And yeah, there's like some big things that are kind of wrapping themselves up sometimes sooner than I was expecting. And I think ultimately that's a good thing because it's just making space for other things to take up that space, because they were already trying to vie for space, and now they will be able to do that without kind of shoving things out of the way. So let's get going into March. My making this month, as far as my like actual wardrobe goes, has been, I actually did manage to get some stuff done, but it was more mending pieces that had been sitting on mending piles for like, in some cases, literally years, rather than necessarily making new things. And that is because once I kind of realized / booked Sanctuary's photo shoot, I realized that I just needed to make sure that I could plow through the work that was going to be necessary for that project, all the like remaining bits and pieces. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the Boss Witch section, but it did mean that while we are shifting into a new season, and while I am also needing to prepare for teaching coming up, and having clothing that's going to, work in public school settings, that I also, while there are like gaps in my wardrobe that I would like to be able to just like freshly fill, there are also items that exist in my wardrobe already that are a lot quicker to get fixed up and back into rotation, and that actually make teaching natural dyeing a little bit easier because they're not, like nice fresh makes that I don't necessarily want to risk splashing on or getting in the mess. Like I'm about to head into mucky spring season, which always also includes needing to just have more layers, especially once things really get melting, and Willow's allowed to start going on walks again, that if we go out for a walk and I end up super muddy, that I can come home and just immediately change clothes and keep going with my day. So between that and then the start of gardening season coming up, and then also, like I mentioned, teaching, there's just a lot that I realized I needed to kind of get back into play with my wardrobe and have them be pieces that I felt comfortable getting kind of messy in and not worrying about it. And as much as I love adding new makes into my wardrobe, financially I needed to prioritize supplies for teaching and supplies for getting Sanctuary off and into the world. Also, taxes are coming up, which is always a thing. And so rather than spending money on new fabric, I could just turn to what was in my mending pile, fix those up, and then make other pieces as I have time and as I'm able to, have more resources to do that. So that being said, I had a pair of Air Night pants and then my 2 Not Perfect Linen jumpsuits, which look like the Zadie jumpsuit. If you're familiar with that sewing pattern, these are similar things or similar jumpsuits, and they fit me perfectly. They are like my full happy Boss Witch energy / secret pajamas. I feel like super powerful in them and also very cozy, which is ideal. They make my butt look great. They have really deep pockets and I love them. And with both pairs, I'd blown out and or was close to blowing out the crotch. That's generally where I wear out my bottoms and my jumpsuits, is the inner crotch. So this pair of pants that I have on right now, which are my Maywa linen ones, I had earlier mended one side of the crotch, and then this month I had to mend the other side. And it just got me into kind of a vibe of feeling like I wanted to kind of tackle that, because it honestly doesn't take that long. And I think the thing with mending the crotches of my bottoms was that as much as I appreciate the artisanship that can come with visible mending, I personally don't love the look of it. And especially when I'm going into different environments, like I want my clothes to be able to get away with not looking so threadbare that they then have lots of extra, not matching fabrics and potentially not matching lines of stitching. And so thanks to the Farwoods, which is, there's lots of different mending accounts that you can find online and different books and things like that. But between the Farwoods, which really have some great tutorials on how to do different kinds of clothing mending specifically. And then, of course, always watching Boku Aruna. She's always got really lovely hand stitching happening. I appreciate that. And also this month I really didn't have time to do that. So I kind of took the inspiration of like, yes, we can mend a thing and make it look lovely. And also here's a quick way of doing it in a slightly more invisible fashion. And so I'll show you here that, like, if you look, then yes, definitely there's a patch, but you can't really tell. And that is like, I blew a big hole in this one, but I always keep my scraps. So that's another thing, is that if you are a sewer and you're making your own wardrobe, keep the scraps of your fabric, because like, yes, you can make different projects with them. There's lots of different scrap busting projects, but also it's great for having on hand when you need to mend. So I blew a massive hole in these because I didn't mend them earlier when I should have. And so I just did a zigzag stitch to get a big piece of scrap fabric from this same bolt. I just cut out a piece that would fit the hole and go beyond the hole. And then I did a tighter zigzag, almost like an applique edging, around the hole itself, and tidied up the loose threads that were in between there. And then my trick is, I'm a lazy fucking sewist. And so my trick is that I just pink the edges of whatever my scrap is. And so between the pinking of the edges, which I always then attach on the inside so that I don't have to worry about what those edges might look like on the outside, between that and then the zigzag stitching that I'm using, then it ends up being solid enough. And if it frays, it's not going to fray to a point where, like, chances are good that I'm going to have to remend them before I have to worry about that frayed edge of the fabric. So I did that on those ones. And then for both these this black linen jumpsuit, as well as these black linen pants, I had some black stretch denim. And so I did the exact same thing where I cut scraps, and these ones you can't even see. And there's definitely a difference in the feel of the fabric. Of course, the denim is heavier than the linen is, but I actually prefer having the extra bit of durability in the same spot, because I know it's going to blow again, probably sooner rather than later. And so even if it blows on the outside of the fabric, I have a more durable fabric that in this case is matching underneath, because it's still a black denim. So I did that with that one and with these pants. And then I did the same method on this jumpsuit, and I didn't have matching fabric or a fabric color, but I used a kind of olive denim or cotton twill on the inside of this one, and then I was able to match the thread pretty well. And so this one had a much bigger hole, so I had to do quite a bit of zigzagging, and then this one was just starting to go, but I figured since I'm already in mending mode, I may as well preemptively mend the other spot that is starting to go a little threadbare, because within like 2 wears, I'm going to need to mend it anyway. So those are my mending projects this month, which was kind of my primary additions to my wardrobe. And you'll see what's on my needles over in the What's on My Needles section, because those are pattern samples rather than knits for my own wardrobe, at least at this point in time. So there we go. On my needles this month, I actually finished a bunch of projects, but that is less because I mean, I guess technically, yes, I did get a lot of knitting done, but also most of these projects were already whips at the start of this moon cycle. And so finishing them up, it wasn't like I like whipped off 2 full sweaters in a moon cycle plus pairs of socks. So first up, we have these lovely marigold socks. Obviously you can see I still need to block one, but I did block the other. And this is my Slavic sock, which you can find in the shop. And it knit up. This is the first time that I'm knitting it up. And it knit into a really nice pair of socks. It's got good stitch definition, which I was happy with. And of course it took this dye really nicely, and you can see the other colors in the shop also took really nicely. And so this is actually going to be one of the patterns in Major Arcana Volume 3 coming out this summer. And this is the Sun sock. And so those patterns will be out later this summer. And then these socks are also not going to end up in my sock drawer right away because I'm going to be including them in an exhibition that I am working on. So more on that as we kind of come closer to the various deadlines, but that was that pair of socks. And then also with my Slavic sock, working on the very last sample for Sanctuary. And these are more of a bonus than anything else, but I knit up my Damiana sock pattern, which is going to be a new sock pattern in Sanctuary. And if you have checked out in the Creative Coven community, my knee-high, custom fit knee-high sock class and formula, the Damiana sock pattern is actually the base that I used for the sample that you'll see pictures and video of. But the other sample that I had knit for Sanctuary is in a tweedy sock yarn, and you couldn't see the stitch definition quite as well, so I knew I wanted a regular height pair knit in a slightly clearer looking yarn for the photos. So I'm just working that up right now. This is an exhausted madder bath on my Slavic sock base, and it is coming along. This is the first one of 2, but they don't take me very long to knit up. So I think once I've got time to finish it off, I'm just in the process of turning the heel on this one. And so, you know, given a week, I can get the rest of this and the other sock knit up. But I have a few other things on my to-do list, so it might take me a little bit longer to do that. But I don't have that long because the photo shoot for Sanctuary is actually going to be done before we have our next new moon love notes. So surprise. And so because of that, I'm actually really glad that I ended up, I knew that I was anticipating the photo shoot to be happening starting this summer. And so I wanted to make sure that I got all of the samples out of my way so that once we booked it, I wasn't going to feel stressed. And I'm so glad that I prioritized that, because then once Samson and I phoned the print house on a whim, and it's the print house that I used for Kutch. They are like an hour away from where I live. I'm very grateful and lucky to live in a region that actually has incredible print houses on like very nearby. Most of the time people are needing to be shipping their books really far away and or offshore entirely. Whereas for me, it's actually going to cost less to have the books delivered to my door than it is to drive, like not even including the cost of gas. There's a fee for doing a pickup. If you go down to the factory, which I think is more so just for them to kind of stop there being too much chaos in the parking lot. So there's like a $200 pickup fee, and it's going to cost me about half of that per book to have them delivered to my door. So that's super convenient, because also the cost of gas would pretty much double the door fee. So that's really great. But they had, over the majority of COVID, between the supply chain issues for paper and then staffing shortages, they were backed up by months. Like at one point I got notice that if we were wanting to print books, that you were needing to commit and put down your 50% deposit. And like, these are not small bills. These are 5-figure bills. You were needing to put down your deposit and commit to whatever numbers you were going to print at least 6 months in advance of actually having the books in hand. And in some cases, longer than that. And so that's honestly why Sanctuary has been stuck in limbo for so long, and also why I added the Sanctuary Hub. It was kind of the main impetus for adding it to the Creative Coven community. And as much as I'm happy with the hub, and I plan on continuing to do that for future book projects, just to give people an opportunity to go a little bit more behind the scenes, because these projects do take a lot of time, even if the printing set portion of it is not on ridiculous delay. I also honestly wouldn't have added it in if that was not the case. Normally what I like to do is, a couple of months before we're going to go to print, open up pre-orders, use those pre-order numbers to help determine how many copies we want to print, get them to print, and then, 5 to 6 weeks later, I have the books in hand. And for a while, it seemed like that was not going to be possible. And then on a whim, a few weeks ago, I phoned them up and it is possible again. That is where we're at, is that they're back to like a 5 to 6 week turnaround normally. So then we started figuring out, okay, how do we book our photo shoot in? And then we, through a series of events, decided to shoot it in Winnipeg, the location that we're going to use, because it's going to be a multi-day shoot involving multiple models, and Samson and Kelsey are going to fly out here to do the photos, and we'll have some videography happening and all of that. We ended up having it booked for the middle of April. During actually the same week as I had already committed to running our next live round of the Creative Coven Challenge to welcome new Creative Coven students in and kind of get everybody excited and swatching. And then the Creative Coven students will then go from there into a live 8-week co-working session where we actually take our swatches and turn them into finished patterns before summer comes. So I'm really excited about all of that. But it was like, oh my God, I have 4 weeks to get everything ready for this photo shoot. And so I'm really happy that I was so close to getting the garments done. And so I have been in the process of organizing my test knitters, getting my tech editor sorted out, and making sure that the samples were off my needles, blocked and photographed so that there was a reference photo for my testers. And so one of them is, I showed you last month, Carnelian. And at that point it was still on my needles, and it is now off my needles. And it's super fun and drapey. I'm actually happy with how it turned out. I wasn't really sure what to expect, but it's like really fun and drapey and kind of loose and great. And so that's Carnelian. And then I also have Passion Flower, which is getting a lot of love already, which makes me really happy. And it's an open front cardigan that is just super basic and cozy. And this one I knit up as a 48-inch bust. And so it's like a 12 to 13-inch amount of positive ease on me. Normally, honestly, I wouldn't knit one this large. I'd probably knit the size down smaller. I normally knit myself around a 44-inch because I do like some positive ease in the way that I wear them. But yeah, so it's just like there's no real shaping. It's got a bit of a V-neck. It's rolled hems and cuffs all the way around. So it's super cozy. Knit with my Roots yarn held double with mohair. I used Julie Aslin's Anatolia yarn. And it's so lovely and it's so cozy. So at this point, we are still looking for testers in the upper sizes. We go up to a 72-inch for this pattern. And Carnelian and actually Cedar also is getting re-released with extra sizing up to a 72-inch-ish, I think. So if you're interested in test knitting, check out the link to see if I'm still accepting folks for those upper sizes. We filled up to around the 60-inch sizing range, but we do also want to get testers for those upper sizes. So check it out. And I hope that you're really excited. I'm excited. And I'm also just really glad to have these off my needles and ready to go for the photo shoot in a couple of weeks. So with my dye pots this month, I actually didn't have anything really actively on the go, although I did have a custom order after doing all of those big dye pots last month with Slavic Sock as well as Pasture DK. I did have a custom order to fill that needed madder and indigo happening. And so I took advantage of the exhausts. And so, as you can see here, this is another part of the skein from the Slavic sock that I dyed up for those Damiana socks. So this was the first exhaust after doing the first big batch, or that first bath. And then I popped in this curtain because I wanted, so for Sanctuary, we're going with just textiles everywhere and cloth everywhere, and these beautiful berry and pink and reds across the board. And so I had an undyed cloth curtain that I think I probably found it at a secondhand store, probably at MCC. And I had scoured and mortared and tanned it beforehand, and then just hadn't dyed it yet. And I just really love the texture of it. And so, like, yes, it has its loops, so it can be hung as a curtain after the fact, but I figured it would make for a really nice tablecloth for the food and recipe scenes that we're going to be shooting, because it's got a bit of texture but is still a muted color and is not like overly distracting. So I think it'll be a really nice backdrop for the food shots that we are going to be doing for the book. So this honestly sat, I forgot about it, and it sat in the pot for several days, like probably more than half a week after the fact. And then I washed it, and it came out this like really perfect peach. You can see it's pretty similar to my skin tone. And so I think it's going to be just perfect for our photo shoot. And then with the indigo, I dyed a bunch of skeins of yarn for the custom order, and then did some cloth. So this is just one piece of cloth because there will be something that I show you next month that I have been stitching. I've been making a quilt with some larger pieces of fabric. And again, this was just fabric that I had found in my stash and dyed. And it's cotton, but beyond that, I don't know when or why I bought it. But I have I have like an entire bin of fabric that is different bolts, sometimes linen, sometimes cotton, sometimes probably a blend of both. And they've been prepped, so they've been scoured, tanned, and mordanted, and they're just basically waiting for me to have a whim and toss them into a pot, which is honestly a really convenient way of functioning for me. So this was one of them. And then I did the exact same thing because I had an European buckthorn berry pot to exhaust. And so that plant installation that I mentioned, I will tell you a little bit more about later. I wrote a couple of grant applications, and I'm waiting to see whether or not they come back in a good way for me. But in the meantime, I've been dyeing things with my local harvests, and especially with the European buckthorn berry, it's such a great heavily pigmented dye pot that takes a bajillion years to exhaust, and I did not want to waste it. And so I had this vintage doily that ended up going into the pot, as well as some more scraps of fabric. I think this will probably get used either for a quilt or maybe for binding for a quilt. It's just like one long strip of fabric, as you can see. And then this is actually a queen size bed sheet, and it is going to be, as you can see, kind of uneven, and that's just because it was a large piece of fabric to stick into the pot, and it was an iron pot. I added iron into the dye pot with the berries, but it's going to be the perfect backing for the quilt that I'm planning on making with this year, or I guess last year's color harvests. And that is my little hack for you, is if you are thinking about making a quilt if you can find used bed sheets at, again, like a secondhand shop or like MCC consignment stores, things like that, they are fantastic for quilt backings because they are the size that you need them to be depending on what size of quilt you're making. So you have your complete piece of fabric. You can just toss it in your dye pot and then you're all set to go, and it's one less step involved in making a quilt. So that was that. And the other thing, as far as dye pots go, that I'm really excited about is last weekend I took a workshop through Botanical Colors with Cara Marie Piazza, who's an amazing natural dyer from the States. And she taught an ice dyeing class, and I learned so much. I'm so excited and so inspired. It does not work well on wool, which makes me really sad, but it works great on cellulose fibers and especially on silk. So that makes me really excited. So my plan is to have some things to show you for next month's New Moon Love Note, because I'm going to be dyeing up some pieces for the Sanctuary base outfits, as well as some extra textiles to toss in and around, maybe some pillowcases, things like that. And the snow is still melting, but it is still out there. So I just need to find the snow that Willa has not been tromping on. And I'm going to be using that. And I'm really excited about what this is going to potentially mean for next winter. It's a really great method for getting really fun and unexpected results, and also using up the remnants of your exhaust baths, which makes me really happy because it's just another great way of making your dye baths go as far as possible and not wasting any of that precious pigment. And especially in a place that has so much snow for so much of the year, it's really exciting to think about projects that can make use of the snow rather than needing to be pulling potable water all of the time. So I'm really excited about what is going to end up happening with that. I'm envisioning many quilts in my future using the technique, but by next month I should have some things to show you for the Sanctuary photo shoot base outfits. I actually saved myself a little bit of anxiety, and rather than sewing everybody outfits, I bought ready-made pieces that are cotton and linen blends. And by blends, I mean literally blended with one another, not with any synthetic fibers, because that would not work. And so I'm going to be dyeing up those pieces. And so that's another thing is, if you are, wanting to get into a handmade wardrobe or a naturally dyed wardrobe, and you're, maybe you don't have the skill set yet to sew things, or you don't have a sewing machine, or just it's not of interest to you, you can totally dye pre-existing items, just like what I did here. You don't need to sew things from scratch. You can go to secondhand stores. You can go to the mall. Fast fashion is a problem, and also it is in a lot of ways for many folks the most accessible thing that is out there. And so we can extend the clothing lifespans that we have in our wardrobe by mending them, by dyeing them, just by taking care of them. Fast fashion can be thwarted literally by just giving the clothes that already exist in your wardrobe a longer life. So I'm going to be doing that with this ice dyeing, and I will show you next month what the results are. Part of getting Sanctuary, and just generally any of my book babies, into the real world is making sure that I have all of the pieces that I need for not only the project samples, but also for the props and decor, and especially with Sanctuary, where we're going to be creating like truly a whole little world for our photo shoot. Then I have been making extra projects. So that has included playing with these beam paints, which are really lovely, all natural paints made in Ontario. And so I was making some artworks, which you'll see how they actually turn into their final variations once we do the photo shoot. But that was a lot of fun to make, and it's just one of the many things I'm pulling together for kind of the backdrop of things. And And then I have been working on finalizing the lap quilt sample that I am popping into the Sanctuary Hub. And it's a tutorial for making a hand quilted or hand stitched lap quilt and a whole cloth lap quilt. So you're just dealing with two pieces of fabric sandwiched together and then quilting them together and then adding the binding. So it's a really great project if you want to get into quilting, but the idea of like piecing a whole quilt top together is intimidating or you just don't have that much time. And the velvet is just absolutely delicious. So that should be in the shop soon or in the hub soon. Um, Back to the whole idea of painting my ideas out, I just wanted to give you a little behind the scenes look at some of the drawings and paintings that I ended up making for that plant installation that I mentioned last month and have mentioned this month as well. It's a much larger project that has a lot of different components that are going to take quite a bit of time to build out, but I did put in a couple of grant applications this month to get that started. And so I just wanted to give you a little behind the scenes of the sketches, at least for what they are going to be. And that includes having a little display at this year's Manitoba Fiber Fest in September. That'll display some of the work that I will hopefully be able to get done in time for it, as well as the harvest quilt using last year's harvest dye results and the quilt that I will hopefully be making during a residency this summer. So I hope that you find them fun. Duplicate this. Da-da-da. Da-da-da. Great, and now we are going to once again remember to put in our hex code. Okay, so here's our style board. I have figured out my fonts. I have figured out my colors based on the help of my casual photos up here. If I had a logo, I would pop it up there. And if I go into presentation mode, how cool is that? I don't have oodles to tell you about this project yet. I will have more to show you next month. But as you can see, I am stitching away with this small, it's like a wall-sized hanging quilt, and I am using naturally dyed fabric and silk thread to make it. This month has been absolutely full of books, which makes me really excited and really happy. I'm a total bookworm, and I just happened to get really lucky this month between sales from different shops and then also finding used books that I'm really excited to have in my library. My goal eventually, like long term, is to have a public studio space where folks can come and do workshops and hang out and shop and all of that. But included in that is like a library nook area where I can share my very large and growing natural dye library because I'm really enjoying the opportunity to find new titles and from different countries. And I realized this month that Google Translate is actually a very useful tool and is pretty damn accurate. It's not accurate across the board. It's not perfect, but it is good enough for me to now consider basically all books fair game. So I ended up this month finding this book, which is a Polish book. It's written in Polish and it's all about block printing, specifically indigo and batiking. And it's, as you can see, quite old, in decent shape, but like not grand shape. And it's, yeah, all about Polish history of block printing. And so I'm really excited about that and reading more about that practice from one of my ancestral homelands. And then the other book that I got in a different language is this German book that is all about, there's a little bit about natural dyeing in the front end of it, and then it goes beyond that into the like sociological kind of alignments of color and why we associate different colors with different things. So especially as a natural dyer and as like a color researcher, I am just absolutely fascinated by this book, and what it is going to mean as like an addition to the knowledge of the history of natural dyeing and how we value colors. And so in this book, it talks about how poverty is associated with undyed colors, and, you know, black being associated with mourning, and, you know, those purples being associated with royalty. And like, I know some of the history behind some of those reasons, but I'm just really excited to dig a little bit further into it. And so again, this book is in German. So I cannot technically read it, but with Google Translate, I can read it well enough. And I personally have a relatively easy time picking up on the patterns of languages as long as I understand their basic sentence structure. So I'm excited to dig further into this. Alongside, so I bought both of those from this woman who basically hunts down, in particular, Slavic region books. And I'll pop a link to her shop. But she's really great and was super helpful. And so I got both of those books from her. I also got this traditional knitting patterns book. And I was particularly interested in it because it breaks down some of these traditional stitches. It's just an old school stitch dictionary, but it breaks things down by region. And so I was extra interested in just the historical association of different stitches from different regions. Particularly, this is mostly focused around Europe. So yeah, I'm excited to have this. Not so much because the stitches are revolutionary for me, but more so just knowing a little bit more about their kind of origins that we are associating with them. So yeah, that's this book. And then the last one that I got from her is this cute little pamphlet. It is written in Polish. And so you may know about Ukrainian pisanki eggs. Poland also has a history of making these pisanki eggs. We just spell it differently, but the process is the same, where you are doing like a wax resist on an egg, dyeing the egg, removing the resist. It's basically batiking on eggs, and it's a really common thing to do around Easter time. But I was really excited about it because I am trying to incorporate more traditional ancestral practices into my ritual work, and so this feels like a fun thing for me to do around Easter. And I'm also really interested in symbols, specifically pre-Christian symbols in various regions, but right now I'm really trying to research those symbols in Poland. And so this is actually a good little resource. So again, it's in Polish, but with the thanks of Google Translate, that will help. But also the photos on this are really good. So even without reading Polish or having Google Translate, I could go step by step through how to do a pisanki egg. So I'm excited about that. Other books that I ended up adding to my library this month included finding another couple of really good natural dyeing books. I got these a little bit longer ago. I might have gotten them in February, but I didn't mention them. So North American Dye Plants, it's a tiny little book by Anne Bliss. And it's just useful as a reference. She did color fastness tests, so I think that in particular is of interest to me, but also just having this, especially as I'm getting ready to head into the classrooms around the province in the next month or so. I'm glad to have this on my or in my library. And then this book is fascinating. It's called The Red Dyes, Cochineal, Madder, and Murex Purple. And I was whenever years old when this arrived to find out that Poland used to be the main European exporter of cochineal. So it was it's like a relative of cochineal, also referred to as a kermes bug, but it's same kind of a beetle. And so it used to be what Europe used in the dye trade until they discovered the Mexican cochineal bug. And that one was more desirable. And so it usurped the cochineal trade. But I didn't realize that Poland even grew those bugs, and they do. And so there's just a whole bunch of other things that are really interesting about specifically those pinks and reds in the international dye trade history. And so I'm excited to dive deeper into this book and learn a little bit more about that. And then I finally got my copy of the Bible. This is Dominique Cardon's Natural Dyes. It is a very expensive textbook. It is also the Bible as far as natural dyers are concerned, in my opinion, / in many people's opinions. And I've borrowed it from friends over the years, but it is a pricey textbook, and so I never had my own copy. And then Maywa decided to do a 20% off sale, and so I stocked up on supplies for teaching and spent a lot of money on that, and didn't even touch my own supplies for my own studio because I spent so much money. But I got this because it was the perfect opportunity to grab a copy, and it's going to be so useful in the classroom. I'm really excited to have this on hand, especially for my older students. I teach kindergarten, nursery through grade 12. And so some of the schools that I'm going to be going to have students in high school that I'll be teaching. And so I'm really excited to have this reference for them. As you can see in the back, we go straight up into the chemical breakdown of the different dyes and the dye chemicals. And so it'll be nice to have this as a reference in hand for them to be able to check out, so that there's that deeper understanding for the kids that are interested in it. Obviously you don't need to understand this much to have fun with natural dyes, but I certainly like it. I find it very useful for troubleshooting, to understand the chemical breakdown of the plants that you are using, so that you kind of know how to anticipate different things that might happen with it. And so having my own copy that I can travel with and have as a reference on hand is really, really exciting. And it's going to be my light reading when I go into the woods next weekend with some friends. So that's that. And again, I love plant books. So there is a gardening center here in Winnipeg called Sage, and they were running pre-seed season clearance of certain things. And so I grabbed a copy of The Sensual Garden, which is all about aromatherapy plants. Again, really intense, beautiful book. And goes really in depth with a whole bunch of things. And this is actually a factory seconds book, so it was on a significant discount because somewhere in here there's a not perfect something. I haven't actually found any issues with it at this point. And it's extremely in depth and thorough. And so as an herbalist who is working on expanding my knowledge of aromatherapy plants and different uses for the various plants that I work with, I was really excited to grab a copy of this to have on hand. Part of my goal with that studio space is to also have gardens that people are able to come through and to have them be multi-sensual gardens. So ones for adults as well as ones for kiddos, just in terms of safety of plants, and to have spaces where people can be walking through and have it be more fragrant in some areas and have other areas be little snacking areas, and then other areas that are with dye plants. So I'm excited to have this as a reference, especially as I start potentially finding land and then also just building things out. So that's that book. And for those of you who don't know, I collect children's books, specifically picture books. I do not have children that age myself, or of any age, but someday I will have the best library for them. And in the meantime, I provide a library for my friends' kiddos. And so both of these I also got from Sage at the same time. The Little Fir Tree is a really cute book about a fir tree who wants to become a Christmas tree or a Yule tree, and it's a very sweet little book. And then Weeds Find a Way is just a really cool book about weeds and how resilient they are and how we can kind of associate that with us as humans, and also why we should value weeds and not just, want to get rid of them. I think that is starting to change in terms of like a mindset, but I personally really love weeds because they are typically like really great medicinal buddies and natural dye buddies, and just they have value in and of themselves, even if they are not useful as human additions. So this is just a neat little book about weeds and how they spread and how they grow. And so it's nice to have a couple of plant books into my little edition of kiddos books. So there we go. This month's Teeny Tiny Coven projects were really, really fun, and thankfully I managed to do them earlier in the month because after I realized that Sanctuary was going to need to happen, I had to obviously change gears and really focus my attention on making sure that all of those projects got done. So at the beginning of the month, I was still very much focused on that plant installation. And one of my ideas that you will kind of see growing is that I plan on basically making like a teeny tiny coven sized version of this larger plant installation. And so what that has meant is actually just having an excuse to make a whole bunch of really cute, tiny projects made with natural dye plants. And so the things that I've made this past month have been teeny tiny embroidery projects, which you can see here. They are little embroideries of natural dye plants made with naturally dyed silk embroidery thread. So I did balsam fir and nettles and an onion and tansy and goldenrod and a black-eyed Susan. And then I also made tiny little books and covered them in birch bark with like a really, really thin layer of birch bark. And then I made my first attempt at weaving a basket, and it should be noted that probably if you're going to try weaving a basket for the first time in many, many years, it would be smarter to do it with larger strips rather than to make a really small one. But I decided to go small. So it's made with birch bark and wire because I needed the help, and then corn husks, as well as silk embroidery or silk velvet. And then I also made this fabulous doll bed frame, and that's thanks to an Ann Wood tutorial. And so it's made out of clothespins as well as popsicle sticks. And so I made it and glued it, and then my dad painted it this lovely burgundy color. As you can see, it's the perfect size for Abby, but she does need a mattress next. And this is just a quicker, better view of those teeny tiny embroidery hoops. And I also have a Brazil wood dyed one, which you can see in the corner there, which is more of the Sanctuary theme. So I'm really enjoying the idea of making teeny tiny coven sized versions of all of my bigger projects. I think it's going to be a really fun way of making use of my scraps. And I think it will serve other purposes, especially for the projects that are larger and are going to require a little bit more investment from other folks. As you can see, it has been a very busy month around here. I haven't even gotten nearly as far into all of the bits and bobs that I've been doing. I have spent a lot of time staring at my computer, editing videos and writing grant applications and researching grant applications and being on the phone with people and coordinating different parts of the projects that I am working on. And so I'm kind of amazed at how much making I managed to get done alongside all of that work. I blame / thank spring energy. It definitely helps. And I am excited to be planting things in the next coming week to 3 weeks. Sanctuary is going to be coming up with the photo shoot, and then in May we're going to be running a crowdfunding campaign, so please stay tuned for that. We are going to need the crowdfunding campaign to help us to print the books, and so I'm really excited to get that going. And then in the meantime, don't forget that the Creative Coven's refresh with fully captioned videos, new workbook, all those great things is going to be available as of next week. And so if you have ever wanted to become a knitwear designer, check it out, or give me a shout if you have any questions. But it's a really, really fantastic program. I'm really proud of it, especially now that I've given it all of these revamps and given it a refresh and looked at it again. So I feel really proud about it, and I feel really confident that it's going to help you if that is something that you're interested in doing. So check that out. And then even if you're not interested in that, you are welcome to join us in the Creative Coven community. Use code PLAYTIME to get your first free month. And from April 10th to 14th, we are going to be running another live round of the Creative Coven Challenge. Everybody is welcome to join us for that. Creative Coven students will also be welcomed in and joining us for this particular round, whether or not they are community members, to get swatching and get kind of going on their class material. And then from there, Creative Coven students will be hopping into an 8-week co-working with weekly co-working sessions, so that we can take those swatches and turn them into patterns in time for summer. So really excited about that. Also really excited about the Sanctuary photo shoot, which is going to be overlapping, like I mentioned, with the Creative Coven Challenge. So if you join us for the challenge, chances are good that you will also get a little bit of extra behind the scenes of the photo shoot and the book and what we're working on. So please join us for that. Check the links below so that you can find everything that is relevant. And thanks so much for joining me, and I will chat with you next new moon.